Welcome. I'm Jeremy Fricke. I'm the Education and Program Director here at Tri-Faith Initiative. And you are here for Abraham's Whiteboard on the Bahá'í Faith. I'm going to share my screen really quick here. I would love to also sort of see a show of hands in the chat on how many folks know anything about the Bahá'í Faith. It's like say I or me or whatever in the chat there. All right, here we go. 1 second. All right, so we got some a little bit here and there. All right. So I want to remind everyone that Abraham's Whiteboard is an educational class led by me or a guest, where we talk about religious diversity, whether it's particular topics like angels and like psychology, or whether it's particular religions or concepts within particular religions. But we always connect the content back to Judaism, Christianity, and or Islam. Next month, if you would like to join us, first Thursday of the month, we'll actually have Dr. Paul Williams, who will come talk about the connections of Christianity and Hanukkah to history. There's going to be kind of a conversation about, what is the historical background of these traditions? What is the historical context? Where does Santa come from? Things like that. So if you're interested in some of that information and interested in hearing from Dr. Williams, come to that. So tonight we're going to talk about a few different things. We're going to have some conversation, and we're going to have some religious literacy, both for the Baha'i Faith and for the three traditions on the Commons. So we'll start off with a little bit of framing that conversation and a little bit of a conversation and sort of community education about Messiah and other similar figures. Then we'll go into a little bit about the Baha'i Faith, its history and its practices, and I think we'll have a good time having conversations about the ideas and concepts that are brought up tonight. Just as a reminder, there is no proselytizing at Tri-Faith programs. That means that no matter what the topic is, my job is to help promote religious literacy and to promote inclusion. I'm not interested in promoting any particular religion or dismissing any particular religion. I also want to make sure that that this is always something that I try to strive for. I really try to treat people's beliefs and practices, treat all people as they would want to be treated. So how that plays out tonight is that I'm not going to depict the truly central figures of the Baha'i Faith, and actually we may not go through that, but I do want to start off tonight's conversation with a little bit of sort of a personal context. Why would I, Jeremy Fricke, and not just the education director, but partially the education director of Tri-Faith Initiative, why would I talk about the Baha'i Faith here, right? I will be vulnerable here. And when I was a teenager, and even in my very early 20s, I was very Islamophobic. I will not deny that. I grew up in a small conservative town, and that was always in your face in the media. I did not really realize it right away. I actually knew a lot of Muslims myself. My father worked in software development. So, and he had a pretty diverse friend group, but I definitely adopted those ideas myself. The Baha'i Faith has a particularly special place for me, though, because as we'll see, although there are some things that, you know, not everyone's going to share with the Baha'i Faith, the Baha'i Faith does appreciate, respect, and accept the truth of Islam as well. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a little bit. But so being able to love and respect the Baha'i Faith, you really have to understand Islam better as well. And that kind of opened up my own pathway to appreciate Muslims, appreciate other religious groups, kind of because there was an opportunity to be a sort of a level distant away from it. So I want to put that in the forefront, that the Baha'i Faith, although I am not Baha'i myself, friends of mine that are Baha'i and learning about the Baha'i Faith really did help me with my own Islamophobia. I know that seems weird, but I think you'll see it as we go through. The Baha'i community also tends to have a huge passion for interfaith work. And some of the friends that I made really helped inspire that in me. And it is, you know, I have mentioned before, I am not Baha'i, but I do love this quote in particular. It was something that people actually put this quote at a bunch of different weddings and, you know, engagement things and stuff like that. Love gives life to the lifeless. Love lights the heart that is cold. Love brings hope to the hopeless and gladdens the hearts of the sorrowful. That is actually a quote from one of the sons of one of the main prophets in the Baha'i Faith. So let's kind of go into what we're going to talk about tonight. So the Baha'i Faith, firstly, is a fairly large religion. It is smaller than the big 5 or 6. It's probably like, I think, number 7 maybe on the list of organized religion sizes. And it is one of the most widespread, as in there are Baha'is in almost every country in the world, and in almost every sector of society. There's a few Baha'is here and there. All of the folks on here are identified as Baha'i. You'll notice Dwight from The Office in particular is on here. Mr. Rainn Wilson, who's very outspoken. Some of these may surprise you. You know, Carol Lombard and Patricia Locke. Cindy Blackman is married to Carlos Santana. Dizzy Gillespie is a very famous jazz musician, for those who don't know. But there are Baha'is everywhere, and this is, you know, every time we bring up a new religious group or kind of religious movement, we'll see something similar, right? The folks of various religious backgrounds are part of our communities, part of our lives. Before we kind of get into sort of the history, if you will, I want to first start with just a couple of really simple basics here. Firstly, it is a religion that was founded in the 19th century. We'll talk a little bit about what that looks like and the context, but it is one of the youngest religions for its size. It is an Abrahamic religion, and what that means is that the Baha'is see themselves as part of the sort of genealogy of Abraham. Their prophets connect themselves to the various wives of Abraham, and they are particularly devoted to Abrahamic texts and Abrahamic stories in general. So there's no doubt that the Baha'i Faith is objectively Abrahamic. The second is that they are also a monotheistic tradition. One God, and in fact, this is highly prioritized in much of the language in the Baha'i faith. And we'll look at a couple of quotes that show this a little more explicitly, but one God, very, very important to the Baha'i faith. And then the fourth is this concept that is actually found in all, or the vast majority of Abrahamic traditions, progressive revelation, which we'll talk about in a little discussion in a minute here. But progressive revelation basically is that the belief that there are prophets that continuously come and continuously unveil the kind of grand story of what God intends for humanity. Abrahamic traditions are like this already, that they don't all agree on when that prophecy ends, but the idea that there are prophets and each one kind of comes at particular times to particular people for a particular purpose and kind of unveils the continued story of God. That is a very central thing in the Baha'i faith, and it is very important in all Abrahamic traditions, really. We just sometimes don't call it that, but that's a very important piece of the Baha'i faith as well. But I do want to have a little bit of a discussion question here. We could have some level of controversy. Whenever a religion does come from an existing religion, it can bring up a lot of complicated feelings and tensions. There is some complexity. I mean, there's a history that we have to acknowledge of, Christian-Jewish relations, Muslim-Christian relations, and that can cause some complicated feelings. Why do you think that is? And what do you think are some ways that we can kind of, understand the feelings, but maybe work to keep promoting better dialogue and relationships? And you're welcome to raise your hand if you would like to speak out loud or type in the chat.
I was just going to say one thought on that is just, I think, and with any tradition, right, there's a wide range of orthodoxy or literalism, but for a lot of people, like, our religion is our truth. And so maybe something coming out of that truth and being different, right, can be seen as, perversion seems like too intensive of a word, but that essentially, right, of kind of changing the truth.
Yeah, it's scary. Thank you. Lachelle?
Yeah, I was going to say something similar. I think it can be scary and frightening and threatening, mostly from the fear perspective. And I think what happens at Tri-Faith and the work that's being done at Tri-Faith is a great example of what we can do to support dialogue and relationship building in those situations.
Right. Oh, sorry. Did I hear another person? I just also want to point out Kate and Jean in the chat. I suspect it comes from some place of insecurity, as well as that it becomes difficult to sort of think outside the box, think of how other people may perceive the things that we hold dear and even value them, but read them or understand them differently than we do. It can be challenging. I mean, part of the purpose of Tri-Faith Initiative really is that historically Jews, Christians, and Muslims have not got along that well, and to some extent that is because we are so close, right? We have sort of a kinship here, particularly between the Abrahamic faiths, but we can extrapolate that to more for sure. I think it's important that we challenge ourselves to figure out, what is the best way to make sure that this dialogue continues to happen, that we continue to try to build relationships, and that we challenge ourselves to really try to understand others, even if we don't agree with them at the end of the day, right? All right. If you have any other thoughts that come up about this, please feel free to respond in the chat, or if there's anyone else that has a last second addition right now, I'm happy to take a second. All right. One last. Here, I'll mention Ian's, and then I'll call on you, Abu Bakr. Let's see. Yes, so there is the difficulty of many, and to some extent, many traditions do believe in sort of the texts being closed, right? That there are no more additions after that. That is an important thing, and there's nothing wrong with believing that, really. It's more just that some may disagree with that. And Abu Bakr.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. I really understand partially the reason why I think you mentioned that why you thought about having this lecture, because you have personal connection to the Bahá'í Faith. And to tag along with what you've mentioned as the purpose of tri-faith, which is the three faith, Muslim, Christian, and Jew. I'm just trying to understand if there's a framework where it's more like trying, we as tri-faith partners, trying to educate ourselves more on our faith, or is it more like an interfaith where the purpose is more open to other faith? Just want to ask that question and see if the purpose was interfaith or more restricted to tri-faith. So that's I guess my question.
Yeah. So firstly, I don't think those are mutually exclusive. I'm going to start with that, that we can prioritize, focus on, and really go deep with these three traditions. Sometimes there is a lot of value, and it's even like, if let's say we are focused on the three congregations on the commons. Okay, there is also a lot of value to learning about or having relationships around something that is neutral to us, right? There is some value to saying, let's look at this thing that very few of us, or maybe even none of us are, and let's say, okay, that there's this idea in it. Is there a similarity? Is there a difference? Sometimes it can be difficult to get to certain questions or certain conversations without having that sort of shared neutral ground sometimes. So, throughout the year, my focus is generally on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And I try to have a pretty equitable approach to all three of those throughout the year. And once in a while, we look at another tradition together. Everyone is welcome. We have tri-faith in front of the name. There's nothing arguing about that, but there is the potential of everyone being able to come together, and we can learn about these things together and have conversations together because of this. Does that answer your question, Abu Bakr?
Yeah. I would say kind of, because my initial thought was more like more tri-faith, more, let's say, Muslim people learning more about Christian learning about Jew learning about Muslim, stuff like that. But I guess, opening it to maybe other faiths, there's a value to it, but, some other times too, it could be, maybe seen by other people as being outside of the tri-faith, like the name says too. So.
Yeah, it's something that we continue to have conversations about. People come to us for religious literacy in general, but particularly on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. That's why we don't sacrifice time devoted to the communities on the commons to do things like this. And as we'll continue to talk, like this question, right? This is a valuable question to have among folks that are connected to Tri-Faith Initiative. This is a valuable conversation to have, and one that I think we'll probably always have to some extent. I don't control all those things. It's something that will always be a little bit in conversation. Okay, so let's kind of keep moving on a little bit. So, and again, I invite people to add as they want to in the chat or raise their hands. I do need to give a little bit of a background on Shia Islam in connection to the Baha'i Faith, because Shia Islam is important in the Baha'i Faith. The main thing is, and firstly, Shia Muslims share the 5 pillars of Islam, which many of you probably already know. They do have some different beliefs, in particular on who the successor after Muhammad was supposed to be. They disagree. They believe that there's sort of a genealogical lineage of people that are related to Muhammad that were supposed to be the sort of imams, which is a different thing in Shia Islam. It's an overall leader in Shia Islam. And I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this, but the largest form of Shia Islam is called 12er Shia Islam. There was a succession of 11 imams, and they led the Shia community in general. And the 12th imam disappeared one day. There's a belief in 12er Shia Islam that this 12th imam is in hiding. They call it the occultation. It's sort of like a miraculous hiding. And there's a lot of traditions in 12er Shia Islam where one day this imam will return, usually understood to be at sort of the end times with the return of Jesus. This is not, firstly, I want to mention this is not really the most common form of Islam. This is a large form of Islam in Iraq and Iran, but much throughout the world, it is smaller than the majority. All right. So I want to firstly ask this question. Actually, wait. Sorry, I'm skipping around for a second. Actually, I'm going to ask a question here in a second. Okay, so, and again, I ask the Muslims in the community to add on or to refine what I'm saying here. There is a clear understanding in Islam that one day the Messiah will return. He's never died, and it's Jesus in Islam. Jesus as the Messiah, or Isa, Prophet Isa. One day he will return close to the Day of Judgment, and this will be one of the many signs of the Day of Judgment. There is a common but not universal belief that there is also a secondary figure that happens near the end times that's called the promised Mahdi, and which means the rightly guided one. And usually the Mahdi is associated with a little bit more of like a political change, and the Messiah is generally understood with more of a religious change, although it depends again on who you talk to a little bit. So the Mahdi is not a foundational belief in Islam, in my experience, but it is a common belief, and it's especially common in Shia Muslim communities. Another thing to remember, we talked about it, the Baha'i Faith started in the 19th century. This is actually the same time that the Millerites in America were very big. The Millerites were a group of Christians that were trying to determine exactly when Jesus would return. And they came up with the date of, I can't remember the exact date actually, but it's in May 1844. There was a particular day and time, and Reverend Miller brought people out to basically upstate New York and said, this will be the place where Jesus returns. And overnight they waited, and there were thousands of people with him. Overnight they waited and nothing happened. If you are interested in learning more about that, it's called the Great Disappointment. And what ends up happening out of that is a lot of questions, right? If you are deeply committed to this idea that the Messiah will return on this particular day and time and place, and it doesn't happen, you have to ask a few questions, right? The first question is whether, my whole faith is a sham. But the more common questions that ended up creating, to some extent, some ideas around new religions are, what if it was a spiritual return? Or what if he returned somewhere else? And just as a side note, the spiritual return piece is actually what Seventh-day Adventists believe. Seventh-day Adventists ended up kind of offshooting from the Millerite movement. If you are interested in more, definitely Google, Millerites, Great Disappointment, etc. All right. So much of the Baha'i faith, much of the Baha'i story ends up happening in Iran. A little bit of it happens in what would be modern day Israel as well. But it's a deeply Persian or Iranian religion, right? Or at least it started there. And this is actually a map of the area in the 19th century. Okay, so we're going to keep kind of going through the genealogies, right? Again, a little bit of religious literacy that runs around different religious groups. So from this movement, there's this person who is Sheikh Ahmad, and he was a Shia Muslim, and he very much focused on a deeply mystical interpretation of the Quran. He also popularized the idea of the Mahdi coming very, very soon. Again, we have this kind of movement in the Americas and Europe, but also actually in Persia at the same time, that is very excited about these messianic type of figures coming, sort of end times ideas, etc. Some examples of like a mystical interpretation would be like really, really looking at the numerology, for example, behind particular words and trying to understand what these numbers might mean. Maybe I'll look at the first letter of every verse, and that adds up to this number, that must be in reference to another verse, and then they find mystical connections between all those pieces. This part will go a little quicker. So the person who he sort of appoints as his successor is Sayyid Kazim, and they continue to really prioritize this idea that the Mahdi is coming. On his deathbed, he says that the Mahdi is here. The Mahdi is basically an adult right now. Abandon everything and try to find him. So this brings us to Mullah Hussein, who looked for the Mahdi in Shiraz, and he was seeking someone who was between the ages of 20 and 30. He was in perfect health. He was supposed to have no traditional education really, but appear very, very intelligent. And another mystical prophecy of sorts was that this Mahdi would provide a very beautiful commentary on the Surah of Joseph, which is in the Quran, unprompted, that they wouldn't be asked for it, and they would just say, this is my commentary on the Surah of Joseph, which is known as being a very difficult text to interpret in general. Sorry, I see a chat thing here. So he runs into this young man who invites him in for tea, and he says, what are you looking for? And Mullah Hussein says all those things except for the unprompted Surah of Joseph. And the person says, behold, all these signs are manifest in me. And then he says, now is the time to provide the Surah of Joseph. And these are the stories as the way that most Baha'is would tell them. He calls himself the Bab, which in Arabic means the gate, B-A-B, as in that idea that I hearken back to, that the Mahdi and the Messiah come together. The Mahdi is sort of the John the Baptist-like figure for the Messiah, if that makes sense. For those who have a Christian background, John the Baptist is sort of like the path layer for Jesus. That's kind of how this is understood. One of the most let's see. So the Bab had a few major theological interpretations that were very, very controversial at the time and continue to be controversial. In particular, his interpretation of the day of resurrection, which it traditionally has been interpreted in a way that it's pretty direct, that they're after the let's see, it comes with the end times where the dead are resurrected. He interpreted it as the beginning of a new age instead, that this is an age of resurrecting the spirit, a very mystical interpretation of the day of resurrection, and that a new age is beginning, the sort of age of fulfillment. He also prophesied this Messiah, and he continued to call them the one whom God shall make manifest. All right. So I want to hear some different opinions. What is your tradition's story of what a Messiah is, of who a Messiah is? What are some words that would describe them? What would they stand for? I'm keeping this pretty open. What is the traditional understanding or your personal understanding? I want to have a really open conversation about this. Or I mean, do you believe in one? You don't have to believe in one in this situation either. And you are welcome to raise your hand or type in the chat or whatever would be most comfortable for you. Any takers? I would love to hear how people understand the Messiah or a messianic figure.
I guess I think of someone like coming to save, you
Okay.
know,
Save from what?
save people from something. I think in the religious context, I mean, as a Christian, I think of, right, like saving you from damnation.
That's fair. I see Allie would expect a leader that shakes things up. I mean, would they be a political leader? Would they be a religious leader? Would it be obvious? You know, are there particular traditions in your experience that say something about what a Messiah is, or what you would, you know, what they would do more specifically? No? Well, if you have any additions, please feel free to add to the chat. Oh, wait, I think I hear someone. No?
Could make a comment. Just a simple comment that whether it's Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, pick a faith, that person that is a Messiah for that time is guaranteed to be a controversial figure because they're coming at a time when change is needed.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it does appear that that's the prophetic way that's described in most traditions as well. Yeah, I see. Ian Jones is talking about kind of the warrior Messiah rather than sort of the religious Messiah. And I have a couple whispers here that are saying that there's both an age of the Messiah as well as a that the Messiah will appear in Jerusalem at some point. These are all, you know, there's a lot of traditions around who the Messiah is. It's a very central concept in the Baha'i faith. So I think it's very, very important to recognize that. And it's totally valid. You know, not everyone believes in a Messiah, not every religion, period. But it is a very common belief in a lot of traditions, as we can see here, at least something that appears in that way. All right. Oop. Okay. So I'm going to kind of keep going with sort of the history here of the Baha'i faith. So the Bab, he kind of creates an apostle system. He has 18 apostles, 17 of which met him personally. The one did not, and she was a woman. She was named Tahire eventually. And part of what made the Babi faith, which is what this would be called at this point, right? Because they're following the Bab. What made it controversial is a very, very high level of gender equality at the time. in that time period. It just wasn't great. I mean, honestly, it wasn't great in America. It wasn't great in Europe. It wasn't great anywhere. And I mean, we probably have some ways to go still anyway. But they called them the letters of the living. And there's a lot of numerology behind that we can certainly get to if we want to. There's a lot of numerology in especially the foundings of the Baha'i and the Bahá'í Faith. So just this is, so firstly, I want to mention that, there are events and interesting things that happen that I cannot mention, but he does declare himself to be the Mahdi in Mecca. And that was actually at the time, it was not a big deal. It was kind of like, this is a random guy saying some things, and he kind of, he left. He declared it, I forget it, in another town, and that's when it became an issue because he did it twice. But he gained followers very quickly, tens of thousands of people. The Bahá'í Faith did not take long to grow. He was a serious concern to people. They were worried about this young man who claims religious power and also has tens of thousands of people following after him, as well as really is politically complicated, right? There's some questions about exactly, is he going to start a fight or something, right? There's some worries about things like that. He's imprisoned, and during his imprisonment, he writes sort of the religious text that he's associated with, which is the Bayan, which really interweaves both a lot of mystical, very very high-minded spiritual texts or spiritual ideas with religious laws, and they were quite controversial, but he was able to sort of reflect it in many, not reflected. He was able to copy it many times through how many followers he had. And it was the 19th century. There was access to the printing press and things like that. So this is actually what ends up being a very core belief to Baha'is as well. Does anyone want to volunteer to just read what this says here? I'll have some other quotes too, if you're interested. I'm happy to read them, but I think you'll get tired of hearing me all the time.
I'll read it.
All right, thank you.
It says, "Whoso possesseth power over anything must elevate it to its uttermost perfection, that it not be deprived of its own paradise. Should he know of a higher degree of refinement and fail to manifest it, he would deprive it of its paradise, and he would be held accountable."
Thank you. What do you think that means? At least, so how do you think that's usually interpreted?
I think it basically means that if you have power over anything, you have to elevate it essentially so that it reaches its full potential. Mm-hmm. And should you know of a higher degree of refinement and fail to manifest it, you'd basically be depriving it, and then you would be responsible for that or held accountable for it. Yeah.
So something that we'll talk about a little more in a minute is in the Baha'i Faith, one of the really core purposes of life is to sort of perfect what we have control over, whether that's our jobs or our ethics or whatever, right? And this is not, most of the beliefs are shared in many ways, at least in some capacity, but that is very, very central to the Baha'i Faith. All right, there's a lot of great conversation in the chat. Please check it out. So we see that he's creating scripture in a sense, right? And this is very controversial. And this kind of concept is reflected in our three, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim traditions as well. People claim some sort of religious authority. So as the Bab is imprisoned, the Bahá'í Faith is very much in flux. There are folks that are starting to be more militant. There are folks that are very, very pacifist. There are folks who think that this is a new religion we should completely separate. There are folks that say that, no, this is a reform. And so they call the Council of Badasht. And there are three really, really central figures at this point in the early Bahá'í Faith. There's Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri, which we'll talk about more in a minute. There's Qudus and Tahirih, which we mentioned a little bit earlier. Qudus is often associated with sort of the more the sort of wing that suggested, no, this is a reform. This is not a break. Tahirih was very, very invested in it being a new religion. Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri, Qudus, and Tahirih left saying this is a new religion, even though it was a multi-day conversation and very difficult and had many other people involved than these three, but these three were sort of those leaders. So although there was a lot of split around that conversation, they ended up leaving fairly unified. It didn't take long after this for the Bab to be executed, which I'm not going to be able to go into the story of that today, but feel free to look into it if you're interested. So I want to stop for a second. Are there any questions, comments, concerns? Are there things that you see that would be valuable for people to know, that would be that would kind of reflect on this? Yes, Yazan.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm just trying to, I like to always look at things from a historical perspective as much as possible. So we're talking about, this is around the time of the Civil War in America, where the British Empire is sort of at war with the French. Is that?
Yeah, I believe, if I remember correctly, I think the Bab was executed in either 1857 or 1858.
And the Ottoman Empire is sort of, it's long gone, or where are we at with that?
It is still in place, I believe. I believe it lasts until close to the end of the 19th century. If someone wants to correct me, please do, but I believe that's correct.
Okay. I mean, I don't know the answer to these questions, but I'm assuming at that time that if there was any remnants of it, that there, at the very least, that there's different capitals of control, they're depending on the region, and Iran or Persia wouldn't be exactly, I mean, that would include the region of Persia, Iraq, maybe to some degree, and northern Syria. I'm not sure, but
those are some great questions. I am not as strong on the geography of the religion, but those are some really good points. There's a lot of interesting politics behind all these conversations, some politics and geography about the movement around this. Thank you. And Mudassir, is that the right? Did I say that right?
Yes. Thank you for the lecture. Just a quick comment from a historic perspective. The claim of Mahdi by Bab there are certain criteria to qualify as a true Mahdi versus, someone claiming as a Mahdi. Just historically, if you look at 19th century, I think there were at least 5 people around the globe claiming to be Mahdi,
Yes.
Bob being one of them. If you go back 500 years over the past 5 to 6 centuries, more than 50 people have claimed to be Mahdi. So just to kind of understand historically, like these are not isolated people. There's many, many examples. Just if you go to Wikipedia, you'll see at least more than 50 names claiming to be Mahdi. What's interesting is from a theological perspective, Mahdi is someone who wouldn't claim himself to be Mahdi. People around him, scholars around him would tell, you are the leader, you are the Mahdi. It's almost like a president of the United States. No one's going to be like, hey, I'm the leader, it's like self-proclaimed. People choose a leader, people choose a president. Similar analogy, people choose a Mahdi. Just kind of an interesting comment on that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that. That's what I hope for, is those educated perspectives on all the kind of background of this. I also see Michelle or Susan Stein says that the Ottoman Empire ends officially after World War I. And the Ian found that the Bab was executed officially in 1850. Right. So there, and yes, in fact, if we're also looking at Messiah, literally thousands of people have claimed to be the Messiah. Even during the time of Jesus, there are texts written about the various folks that do claim that. In fact, a couple of them were named Jesus as well. So there have been many people who have claimed to be these figures. Yes, that's true. It's true. Many folks have claimed these. That doesn't, and I'm not here to judge who's who or anything, but that's part of the context of the story here, for sure. So we're going to kind of move on. The Bab dies, and that is a complicated thing. We're already talking about multiple leaders in the Babi religion. One of the like 4 or 5 is Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri, and he is imprisoned, and they call it the Siashal. It was a really difficult prison in Iran at the time, and he was only in there for a few months, but it was a very punishing prison. He had a religious experience while he was in prison, and he ends up writing it in a book that's called The Summons of the Lord of Hosts. It says, I'll just say this one, turning my face, I beheld a maiden, the embodiment of the remembrance of the name of my Lord, suspended in the air before me. So rejoiced was she in her very soul that her countenance shone with the ornament of the good pleasure of God, and her cheeks glowed with the brightness of the All-Merciful. A lot of people interpret this as sort of, this is sort of the moment that this person sort of is spiritually chosen by God, if you are a Baha'i. The maiden often being associated with sort of like a Holy Spirit figure or an angelic figure of sorts. And not too long after, this Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri, and just as a side note, Mirza basically means Mr., okay, or Sir. Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri starts to go by the name Baha'u'llah, which translates to glory of God. Baha being glory, La being a a shortened version of God. And he was not chosen as the leader of the Babis. There were other people beyond Tahirih, Qudus, and Baha'u'llah that were leaders, and he was not chosen as the leader, but often became sort of a de facto leader in a lot of the communities that he was in. Let's see. So Baha'u'llah was accused of supporting this assassination plot on the Shah. Most historians would say that that probably wasn't the case, that he probably didn't support the assassination plot on the Shah. But as I said before, there was a wide range of Babi beliefs, ranging from a lot of militancy to a lot of pacifism. And Baha'u'llah was one of the people making waves for being a Babi leader. And during his exile, after being kind of associated with this, he wrote the Hidden Words, which is another text of the Baha'i Faith, which we'll actually show in a minute. So this is actually what Baha looks like, glory in Arabic. This is kind of a calligraphy, pretty version, of course, but it basically means glory, and it's sort of part of the tradition in Islam. You've heard the tradition of 99 names of God. Part of the additions that Baha'u'llah makes is that he says that this is the 100th name of God, that glory is the 100th name of God. So you read this right to left, but Baha. Yazan?
Yeah, just a note on that, that the nine-pointed polygons are like a feature in Baha'i architecture and art.
Yes, which they have the 9-pointed here. The 9 points really mean it's the largest number in it's the largest Arabic numeral that is still one single digit. There's a huge emphasis on unity in the Baha'i Faith, and we'll get to talk about that a little bit more. But thank you for pointing that out. You'll actually see that in a lot of the other architectural pieces as well. I know that some of them are harder to see, but if you look behind here, this is the one in Wilmette, I believe. The Baha'i Faith actually doesn't really have churches or tiny temples. The Baha'i Faith generally meets in homes, and there are a few places that are particularly special that are temples, and there's really like one on each continent, or intended to be one on each continent. And many of these are really fascinating because they have 9 walls right around because of that, and it's really a fascinating look to the architecture. The 19 points is also similar, by the way. It's also reflective of the Bab plus the 18 letters of the living. I don't know all the details on the 19 piece, but I know that part is true, that it's in part to represent the letters of the living with the Bab. If anyone wants to add to that, feel free to in the chat. This is one of the more famous quotes from Baha'i texts. O Son of Spirit, my first counsel is this: possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. This was written while he was in exile after being associated with that plot. All right, so we're going to get close to the core beliefs, really, of the Baha'i faith. The most widespread book of the Baha'i faith, and the first one to be translated fully into English, was the Kitab-i Iqan, which means the Book of Certitude, or the Book of Truth, or something like that, right? In 1862 is when he wrote it. It is a, and as I say here, it's a mystical commentary on the Quran with mentions of the Bible. A lot of it is sort of a defense of the Bahá'í Faith, and a little bit of an extrapolation that says, you know, this is the Bab. We have to remember, going back, that the Bab is talking about the one whom God shall make manifest, this future Messiah-like character. A lot of the Kitab-i Iqan is talking about how would you determine whether the person is the messianic figure, you know, the one whom God shall make manifest. Much of the book is focused on really what ends up being kind of the three core beliefs of the Baha'i faith: the unity and mystery of God, the unity of religion and manifestations of God, and the unity of humankind. I'm going to show a couple quotes here. I may not read all these word for word, just because I want to make sure that we have time to discuss some other things as well, but feel free to read it. One thing that is a little bit different about the Baha'i faith in the context of Abrahamic religions is that God is at least nearly unknowable. Very, very difficult. Like, you know, there's I believe I've heard this before, that it's kind of like, does the table understand the carpenter, right? That the created will not fully understand the creator, even if the creator does understand the created. The other piece is that there's one God in the Baha'i faith, one God over all things. Again, that is difficult to understand or difficult to fully know. The second here is the unity of religion and manifestations of God. So what this basically means is there's a figure that is a sort of a type of religious figure that is central to the Baha'i faith, and it's called a manifestation of God. In a sense, there's this belief that there are many, many prophets, and they reflect the divine attributes of God. The purpose of at least in my understanding of the Baha'i faith, the purpose is to reflect the attributes of God. And one of the best ways to do that is to truly understand what these manifestations of God or these prophets are trying to teach. This is in part because God is so difficult to understand that humanity needs messengers. And I'm going to go to this next page to kind of show. So there is a tradition in the Baha'i faith that most major religions are all part of this same story, starting back probably with Abraham and going all the way through many of the figures that we know from other religious traditions, as well as maybe our own, and goes all the way to Baha'u'llah. The basic belief is that all these prophets fundamentally are teaching the same thing. They are teaching it to different people in different places, in their language, in their time of need, So it can sound different, but the core of what they're teaching is exactly the same. Let's see. So as you can see here, there's no denying that Abraham is a very core figure in the Baha'i faith. Let's see here. Okay, so I see one question here is, or a couple questions here. Do Baha'is believe the Bab is an incarnate of God on earth, the 12th Mahdi? And also, does the Baha'i faith consider Jesus to be the Christ? The Bab is not an incarnate of God on earth. A manifestation of God is not God in the Baha'i faith. They are the best representation of God's attributes, but they are the ideal human. The Bab is understood to be the 12th Mahdi, and Baha'u'llah is understood to be the return of the Messiah of sorts. But, and this is where you have to hang in there with me. They are all one, though, right? Going back to sort of this oneness and this unity of the manifestations and sort of the prophets, if you will. They are all saying the same message. They are all at their core the same being. They come to humanity in different forms for different times, for different people, with sometimes progressively revealed teachings. And then the other was Jesus to be the Christ. It depends on how you define Christ, but yes, basically. If we're talking about Christ as in the same as like a Messiah or a very, very highly valued prophet, then yes. As sort of the concept of like the Christian creed, where Jesus dies for your sins, and that means you're saved from hell, that is not really important in the Baha'i faith. Okay. And then this third piece, which is also deeply important, these three are all very important to the Baha'i faith, is the unity of humankind. The idea that all humans are equal and all humans are human, right? And that in the Baha'i faith, there is an idealism of sorts. There's a belief that one day we will all unify and we will all be at peace. There will be a great peace at some point in the future. And that it's humanity's destiny to be unified. Let's see. I will say that this doesn't necessarily mean like everyone will be Baha'i. That means that there's actually an important component of the Baha'i faith that other religions are valued and valuable. You don't really have to be Baha'i to live to Baha'i values according to the Baha'i community. I know that's a lot of Baha'i, but I'm also going to point to this line. Okay. This is another thing that kind of, I continue to try to explain a few things multiple times or in different ways. So I mentioned before that one of the core pieces is to develop our attributes, our spiritual attributes that are kind of reflective of God of sorts, right? Well, a lot of people would ask, what exactly is heaven, or how does this play out? And the easiest way to explain is that let's pretend this left side of this line is farness from God, and this right side is nearness from God. humans' job is to develop these attributes to get closer and closer to God. And they use this life and the next to continue to do that. I know a friend of mine mentioned that one of the easier ways to understand sort of the afterlife in the Baha'i faith is to think about what is this life to someone in the womb, right? That there's no way to completely understand it. It is it's going to happen, but exactly what it looks like is not it's not available for us to comprehend. Okay. So sorry, I want to check. So I want to stop here again for a second. What do you see that is similar or different in your own traditions? I want to invite, where do you agree or disagree? There's nothing wrong with being your own religion. I mean, there are, and also to recognize that there are beautiful things in others' religions as well. Okay, well, I'll keep going. Sorry, one second here. All right. So, all right. So later in Baha'u'llah's life, he continued to write tons of letters and books. When I say about 20,000 separate, books and letters, I mean like, that much. No more. I think I read something like, I think it was like 70 million words ish. Maybe I'm getting that wrong. I don't want to get that too wrong, but it's a lot of books and it's a lot of letters. Okay, that's a lot of writing. But in the Garden of Ridvan, 1863, this is where he claimed to be the one that the Bab foretold, the one whom God shall make manifest. This ended up leading to a series of exiles and eventually an imprisonment that lasted most of his life. He eventually actually was released when the Shah was eventually overthrown by a little more religiously tolerant leader, and Baha'u'llah continues to have a legacy. I'm not going to say a whole lot about these in particular, but we have continued history here. I just am looking at the time and I want to make sure I have a little extra time for folks who want to add a little more. But today we have, in particular, the Universal House of Justice as the central governing body of the Baha'i Faith. The Universal House of Justice is made up of 9 voted on figures who actually, I believe anyone who is Baha'i in the group can certainly affirm this. They have to agree on decisions, I believe. They have to all agree. I don't think it's a vote of majority, if I remember correctly. Abdul-Baha was his son that I mentioned earlier with that quote. Shoghi Effendi was the son of Abdul-Baha, but Shoghi Effendi had no son, so it's just the Universal House of Justice now. Abdul-Baha is a very popular figure because he was actually able to travel to the United States and spoke a lot about the Baha'i faith. Okay, so I'm going to go through this piece a little bit quicker than I would like to, but I do want to make sure that you all know what is important to Baha'is, and I want to ask you, if you would like to engage in the chat, are these important to you and your faith? And if you want to, add, why, what from your faith inspires you in these ways, right? Or do you disagree with them? I don't. You can agree, disagree. I don't. You can do all that stuff. I'm teasing. So one is the equality of women and men, often described as the two wings of a bird. If you do not have one equally developed than the other, you can't fly. This has been important since the time of the bomb. The second here is the harmony of science and religion. That it is important to put all religion to the standard of science, and vice versa. That though we shouldn't be overly filled with superstition, basically, is an important piece of the Baha'i faith. A commitment to universal education, that all women and men should be able to receive an education. And in the Baha'i faith, that includes both traditional education and spiritual education, as well as a commitment to a universal auxiliary language, as in that the whole world at some point should be able to speak to each other. There's a lot of writings about that. In fact, actually, the Esperanto language was quite popular for this purpose. And then finally, an independent investigation of the truth. Basically, that everyone should be looking into ideas, beliefs, traditions for themselves and decide, what is true for them. And then finally, and again, clearly in line with the rest of the Abrahamic traditions, an elimination of extreme wealth and extreme poverty. All right. So let's see. I would like to actually, I would actually like to invite Alex, if you would like to kind of talk a little bit about the Baha'i faith today and sort of how it's practiced a little bit.
Sure. Thank you, Jeremy. And hello to everyone. So the Universal House of Justice, which, as Jeremy said, is the head of the Baha'i faith today, has written about how the world needs not merely political or technological solutions to its problems, but change at the level of thought, underneath action. How do we conceive how we relate to one another as individuals, institutions, and as a community? Do our individual actions, as well as our systems and structures of society, truly reflect the oneness of humanity, justice, and other spiritual principles? And there are spaces in the world for conversations about spiritual principles, but not all of these spaces translate into meaningful action, and some result in actually increased division. So a focus for Baha'is is to try to reflect on spiritual principles in a way that builds unity and also inspires action. For Baha'u'llah said, the well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. And he also said, the betterment of the world can be accomplished through pure and goodly deeds, through commendable and seemly conduct. So Baha'is and their friends around the world since 1996 have been engaged in a process of building community that is directly inspired by the Baha'i teachings. It has 4 activities that are referred to as core activities. 3 of them use a set of materials that draw mainly from the Baha'i writings. Those are classes for children that introduce them to spiritual qualities like love, justice, truthfulness. Junior youth groups, which are groups for young people 11 to 14 that enhance their capacity to recognize the forces of society and to serve their communities, and to do so with the mentorship of someone a little bit older. And then study groups for people 15 and older to learn about the application of spiritual principles in terms of community building, whether that means facilitating a class for children or a junior youth group, or visiting homes of friends and family for uplifting conversations or inspiring storytelling. And then the 4th of these core activities is an interfaith prayer and discussion gathering. It has no particular age group and no particular curriculum. It includes offering prayers, reading the scriptures of various religions, not just those of the Baha'i Faith, and having discussions about the needs of the community and how to address them together through service. And for all of these core activities, all are welcome to join regardless of religious affiliation or theological beliefs. And while Baha'is are generally happy to share about our faith, just like with the Tri-Faith Initiative, proselytism is forbidden to Baha'is. And in addition, Baha'u'llah said to consort with the followers of all religions in a spirit of friendliness and fellowship. And so one way to look at these community building activities with the Baha'i inspired materials is as a case study or a way to practice interfaith community building. Many of the concepts and even more, maybe many of the skills, I think, of facilitating groups for conversation on spiritual principles or visiting homes to share prayers and stories. These are skills that can be applied with the source material from all kinds of religions, not just those from the Baha'i Faith. And so what I've been doing most recently is focusing on the neighborhood that I've been living in, which I just moved in to a neighborhood in Omaha in June of last year in the middle of a pandemic. And a small group of friends and I have been trying to learn about what the community building process can look like when it takes root in a neighborhood. We have some experience in terms of facilitating activities that are around the larger Omaha area, or even remotely via Zoom, for example. But to learn about what it looks like in a neighborhood where neighbors and other friends are coming together regularly to reflect on spiritual reality and to make and carry out plans together to serve the material and spiritual needs of their neighborhood. And the idea is that we're not trying to offer this as a service to the neighborhood, but so much as something that we hope to collaborate with everyone in the neighborhood, that the neighborhood itself takes ownership of the community building process and tries to learn about it together. And so right now in the neighborhood, we have a junior youth group that started just last July. It's very new. And we have a couple of regular prayer and discussion gatherings that have been going on for a bit longer. 2 particular holy days in the Baha'i Faith are coming up. Actually, just this weekend, Saturday and Sunday will be the birth of the Bab and the birth of Baha'u'llah, respectively. And personally, for me, while there are some collective celebrations that are being planned, I'm also thinking and really focusing on strengthening relationships with my neighbors by visiting them. I figured that one of the biggest things that I can do to honor the lives of the Bab and Baha'u'llah and Baha'u'llah's son, Abdul Baha, who is a perfect example of what it means to be a Baha'i, what I can do to honor them is play a part in increasing unity among people. Abdu'l-Baha in particular, as circumstances allowed, he would visit people at their homes and see what he could do personally to help them, to show love, to increase unity. And so that's something that just this past week, a roommate and I have been doing visits to various neighbors, and some of whom we know, and some of whom we just go up to their door, we knock, and we introduce ourselves as neighbors, and we want to learn more about what our neighbors' concerns, aspirations, hopes are, and to try to know a little bit more than just the basic trivia of what they do for work and so on. And it's been really a joy for me to make these visits. And so I guess to wrap up, something that I hope is that if the community building process that is inspired by the Baha'i Faith helps people to realize and appreciate that they don't have to be a Baha'i to benefit from studying and applying the Baha'i teachings, if that happens, then maybe there will be more people who are open to exploring what role other religions, such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, can play in their lives, and that religious prejudice will yield not just to tolerating people of other faiths, but even welcoming them and wanting to learn alongside them about bettering the world together.
Thank you, Alex. I really appreciate that. So as we're getting close to the end of time tonight, I do want to point out firstly, Ali Zimmermas has attached an annual impact evaluation. This is for the whole organization of Tri-Faith. If you would like to, share your voice, what do you like? What can we do better? How has Tri-Faith impacted you? Feel free to fill that out. I also want to invite, if anyone else saw any connections or disconnections between their own religion and the Baha'i Faith, feel free to share them in the chat or verbally. And then my final thing is, I'm wondering whether people are interested in learning about the other Abrahamic traditions that we don't talk about, over the course of the next year or so. We also do not talk very much about the Samaritans. We also don't talk very much about the folks that followed John the Baptist. So those are options in the future, but I do want to know if that appeals to the people here. I hope that the conversation here tonight and engaging with Alex as well has opened up some opportunities to think about both the Baha'i Faith's own history, as well as your history, your connections to some of these ideas, or some of your disconnections to these ideas. And feel free to email me anytime. I'm happy to discuss anytime you'd like to. All right. Well, I want to thank you all again for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the program. Please let me know if there's anything that we can do to improve or anything like that. So thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.